Welcome, my name is Craig Broman, and along with many Christians who are in various industries and professions across our country, that makes up the organisation called City Bible Forum. City Bible Forum is committed to asking the bigger questions, and the question tonight is, do we fear the future? It's interesting, we're here in Adelaide tonight, we're at the Jade. It's a nightclub and it's deserted. Up 24 hours ago, we had the whole place booked out. But because of changes, we're down to a very small group tonight. A guy doing the filming, someone doing the recording, and the speakers and myself and a panellist. So it's great to have you, the audience, joining us tonight on a live feed. 6 months ago, we slated this topic and thought about it. And at the time, we thought, artificial intelligence, we thought climate change, economy, jobs. Never in our wildest dreams would we have thought that on this night, we would be dealing with a topic that everybody in the world is consumed and thinking about. It's one of the greatest public emergencies we've had, nothing like it since World War II even. And the irony is that we can't even get you to come together to talk about what we're fearing in all this. Tonight, we welcome the Honorary Stephen Mulligan, Shadow Treasurer for SA. We have Dr. Sam Chan, who's Public Communicator for City Bible Forum. And they're going to talk for 15 minutes each about what they think is triggering some of our fears of the future. After that, we're going to move to question and answer. And at that point, they'll be joined by a panellist, Dr. Andrew Giles, who's a senior consultant at the Royal Adelaide Hospital, and he's in the emergency department there. So it will be an interesting discussion together. But, you can be present tonight. We want you to be here. So the way you can do that is by texting your questions to us this evening and being part of the discussion when we get to that panel. So I'm going to ask you at home, wherever you are tonight, and for the skeleton group of people who are here, the team, to please give a warm Adelaide welcome to Stephen Mulligan. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much, Craig, for that introduction. And it is a real pleasure to be here this evening to talk about, as Craig said, something that could not be more topical than it is today, and that's how we feel about the future and whether we do fear the future. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that we are here this evening on the lands of the Kaurna people. We acknowledge and respect their relationship with their land, and we also acknowledge their leaders, past, present and emerging. Can I thank the City Bible Forum for putting this evening on? As we've said, this could not be more important, but it's also important, I think, to come together to talk about how we are going as a community with particular issues and how we're going with our thoughts about our futures, both individual and whole, is very important as well. I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion later on with Dr. Sam Chan and Dr. Andrew Giles, which I hope you find just as engaging as the rest of tonight. As a Member of Parliament, as a community representative, I'd like to think that I've got a perspective on how people generally feel about the future, about how they feel themselves fitting into the community and how they see that going forward. I feel very much, it's my observation, that people do feel a little fearful about the future. People do feel apprehensive, they feel a bit anxious, they sometimes feel that their livelihoods are fraught and at risk. And I don't think necessarily that this has always been the case for our community. It's my view that this is something which has emerged only really in recent decades. And I also think that there are some fundamental reasons for that, the change in nature of how we conduct our daily lives. And I wanted to touch on a few of those elements in my contribution tonight. We should all be used to change. our lives are constantly changing. From the moment we are born to right now, to the end of our lives, we are on a constant continuum of change. And a lot of that change is exciting, a lot of it is fun, a lot of it's extremely rewarding. And when you think about the different stages of our lives, it's easy to see why that's the case. As we're growing up, of course, we're learning and we're having thousands upon thousands of new stimuli put to us that we are engaging with for the first time and responding to. As we get older, we form relationships beyond our families. We go through school and perhaps further education. We form personal relationships with people we want to spend at least part of our lives with. I was going to say the rest of our lives, but that as well. And we also enter the workforce. We might make serious financial commitments like buying a house or moving house, for example. We also exit out of the workforce eventually and enter into a later phase of life in retirement. This change is a constant for us, and so we shouldn't be, and I don't think we are generally, frightened of change. But it's the nature of some of the change that we're confronting, which many people are leading to that anxiousness, that anxiety, and that fearfulness, which sometimes pervades their mindset when they're thinking about their lives. If you think of how we work today compared to how we worked, say, 40 or 50 years ago, it's easy to see the radical change which all of us have had to experience as that change has taken effect. It's no secret that we are all working longer, whether we are paid to work longer or whether we just find ourselves working longer hours in the workday. The 8-hour workday is something which vanished long ago for the vast majority of the Australian workforce. And the nature of our work is almost all pervasive now. We all seem to have mobile devices, perhaps multiple ones, many of them loaded with, unfortunately, our email accounts, and we're expected to respond immediately either to a phone call or a text message or an email. And work has started to consume more and more of the time that we spend awake during the day, or even perhaps time that we should be asleep at night. So work is becoming all pervasive. Certainly in the last 10 years, people's work has not been remunerated as well as what it was before the global financial crisis. Wages growth, not just here in Australia, but in most Western countries, has been suppressed. And people are finding the work that they are doing is not generating a pay packet which is broad enough to continue consuming as much of those costs in their daily lives. And that causes stress. And of course, we're not the only ones in our household who are working and working so much these days. It is common, particularly for people in relationships, that both people are working. And that is a radical change from what we had 40 or 50 years ago. My mother, for example, was part of the generation where it was expected, if not required, that once a woman fell pregnant, let alone had the baby, that they were from then on out of the workforce. That's certainly not the case today. And we make the choice as people to enter the workforce not for the fun of it on most reasons. It's because we need the money, because life seems so much more expensive these days. Housing costs in Australia, for example, are far greater than what they used to be. We feel that we need to maintain a much higher standard of living for ourselves these days compared to what our parents or our grandparents do, and that all costs money. And so having a dual income household now has become the norm rather than the exception. That then carries its impacts out into our family lives as well. With both parents working, there's the juggle between, for example, when we have children, the morning drop-off and the afternoon pick-up, the running around after children as they grow older and they have their own activities. Our daily lives are frantic. They're very, very busy and quite stressful. And it's not unusual for the adults in the household to get home sometimes after dark and collapse in a heap, given the efforts they've had at work, getting the kids to school and so on, and attending to all of the children's extracurricular activities. And that is, I think, perhaps a lead cause of why people are feeling anxious and uncertain about their futures. We feel like we're running at maximum capacity now, perhaps even beyond our maximum capacities now, just to lead our daily lives. Financially, the Australian Bureau of Statistics has been recording measurements of financial stress for the community. And over time, we've seen people experiencing one of the 14 or so measures of financial stress that they assess through the 5-yearly census. They've seen those escalate, where more and more people are feeling like their finances are under strain, despite having a dual income household, for example. We also feel that for many of us, if something was to happen in our lives, if we were to lose our jobs or suffer some other shock, that we would not be able to keep going with our daily lives in the same way that we have been. And there's a very prominent financial commentator in the Australian media who uses the statistic that more than 40% of Australians would not be able to meet their immediate financial commitments if they were not paid for a month. And for a lot of people, that's very distressing because the nature of work as well has become less secure. There are far fewer full-time jobs now than what there were 40 years ago, or even 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago. There are many more people in casual work or part-time work, and there are many more people with multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. These are all sources of stress and anxiety and frustration for people. And then on top of that, our lives feel like they are under constant attack from external invaders. I mentioned devices before, but social media is a terrific example about how huge segments of our days have been overtaken by something that 15 years ago we could not even have conceived of. We spend this enormous amount of time looking at Facebook and Twitter and messaging apps and so on top of our work emails, for example, and we feel like we don't have any time genuinely to ourselves and less time with our families. That is stressful. That also contributes to anxiety. We've also gone through a really radical change in our community nationally over the last 40 to 50 years. Our country has been on a deliberate path to open itself up to better engage with the global community, particularly economically. And that has come with really extraordinary benefits and advantages. Our standards of living have, of course, massively increased and improved over that period. We have access to a range of better, more affordably priced goods, services, products that we couldn't have even imagined ago, perhaps 20 years ago, let alone 40 years ago. And that has contributed to our improving standards of living. But it's also made our livelihoods more fraught, as particularly a lot of those industries that people have relied upon for jobs, whether it's been as breadwinners in the family or even that children could look forward to as they left school and wanted to enter the workforce, a lot of those industries are shrinking, diminishing or even evaporating as Australia as a country has found itself very difficult to compete in selling products on the global marketplace. And that's meant that people have fears about their job security in those industries. And we only have to look in recent times in manufacturing in Australia to see how that sector has shrunk. And even a sector which continues to grow year on year, like agriculture, for example, as we send more of our wheat and our wool and our meat overseas. While that industry expands, of course, it's becoming so highly productive that it needs less workers to contribute to that industry. All of this leads or contributes to the community feeling like they don't quite know where to turn to have a safe, livable livelihood going forward, a reliable job that they can bank on. And it's easy to see if you pile all of these anxieties up on top of one another, that all of us must be ready to walk lemming-like off the edge of a cliff and hopefully be embraced by a cool abyss. But we don't. And I think it's important to ask why. Because despite suffering all of these pressures, all of these stresses, all of these anxieties, we manage and we cope. We manage within ourselves as individuals. We manage amongst our broader networks, our families, our friends, our other loved ones. We manage as communities, whether it's suburbs or states, and we manage as a country. I think it's because we recognise that this is not just us going through this. It's not just me. It's all of us. We're all in this together. We are, I think, pretty good at being pretty pragmatic about our circumstances. And we are reasonably good at dialing back what we experience as fear back towards being something more manageable, something that we're able to rationalise and deal with. And the other thing that I wanted to say tonight is I think it's important we reflect on how we're able to do that as people, not necessarily as community leaders, as pastors or as community representatives like members of parliament, but just as individuals. And I think we need to remind ourselves that we've got plenty of tools in our own toolkits so that we can manage these uncertainties, these anxieties and these fears. Part of tonight, I think, is a contribution towards helping not only ourselves and City Bible Forum participants better manage those fears, but perhaps talk about how our communities can better do that. One thing I didn't mention, which I should put on the record as a community representative, is another contributor to fear and anxiety, feeling like our lives are able to be invaded, is that we also feel sometimes we lack control, and those people who have traditionally provided control for us, we perhaps have less faith in them being able to provide that control to us. And I'm talking, for example, about politicians, not far from second-hand car salesmen in the trust rankings in our community. And that loss of faith in this form of community leadership is really troubling because there is a real need to be demonstrating this. And I think what we're seeing at the moment with government responses to coronavirus are governments working as hard as they possibly can to provide that reassurance and that re-establishment of trust at this difficult time. We also, I think, need to think about what we can have faith in. And many of us, of course, have faith in God. Can we re-establish faith in leadership of our communities beyond, for example, politicians or beyond our employers or beyond those other community institutions that we have traditionally found confidence and leadership in? And one of the things that I think has been most beneficial for people during difficult times in recent years has been having had the confidence to re-engage with their local communities, speaking with their neighbours, speaking with people down at the local sporting club, speaking with other people when they attend, for example, City Bible Forum functions or going down to the local Lions Club or the Probus Club. And realising that not only are we all in this together, we're all facing similar pressures, but we all have ways that we can help each other deal with these fears, these concerns and these anxieties. I'll leave my contribution there. I hope that's been of some interest or benefit to you, and I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion. Thank you.
Well, for my midlife crisis, I got myself a motorbike. I also got a high-vis jacket. But my wife says to me, "You cannot wear that jacket." I said, "Why? It keeps me safe." "Because you look silly." I said, "But it keeps me safe." She said, "Well, it was about safety. Why'd you get the motorbike in the first place?" I hate it when they use logic like that. I was afraid of an accident. She was afraid I would look silly. And we all have a lot of things to be afraid about. In summer, where it wasn't safe to be at home. And now we've got the coronavirus where it's not safe to leave home. More things to worry about. The bushfires were just the wake-up call that we're worried about global warming. With AI coming, our jobs aren't safe. And also with the ups and downs of the economy, even our aren't safe. So welcome to tonight's talking about fear of the future. And I'm going to answer afraid of the future from the perspective of a dad, a doctor, and a theologian. So here I've got three things to say. The this. Yes, we should be afraid of the future because fear is a good thing. Fear is good. Fear is what keeps us alive. We are afraid of the saber-toothed tiger. We also know that young people get themselves killed because they're not afraid enough. But at the age of 25, the prefrontal lobe kicks in and we learn to have a healthy fear, and fear keeps us from things. We also have the fear performance, where fear makes us do things, especially because we're afraid of the future. Fear that makes us study for exams. It's fear that makes us save for the... And it's fear that makes us look after the environment. And fear also gets us to do things. Psychologists say we convert fear to excitement, threats, and we finally do what we should have been doing all along. We leave the toxic relationship, we quit the job, and we start a career for ourselves. The Bible is an interesting thing to say. The Bible says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Somehow to be afraid is to be wise. Time. Well, how does that work? Well, I like to go surfing like once a week, and my friends say, well, how can you go surfing? You're Asian. And I know, because when I watch Bondi Rescue, it's always an Asian getting rescued. But I say, well, unlike those Asians, I have a healthy fear of the ocean. And it's a fear of the ocean that gets me in tune, in rhythm with the ocean, and it frees me up to enjoy the water, to go surfing. And the Bible says it's the same with God. There's a God who loves us, who made us, who saves us. And there's a healthy fear of this God that puts us in tune, in rhythm with God and the universe. And it frees us up to enjoy this life. So yes, fear is a good thing. But the second thing often our fears are poorly calibrated. So somehow we're very bad at prioritizing our fears. So when I was a kid growing up in Adelaide, in the 1970s, it was actually legal to smoke everywhere. You could smoke in a restaurant. You can smoke in a doctor's waiting room. And of course, you could smoke in a plane. So my parents were boring, and they used to sit in the back section of the plane where it was non-smoking, but the front section of the plane was smoking, and took off, you could see the cloud of smoke coming to the back section, which was non-smoking. And I used to wonder to my parents, why bother? But think about it, in the 1970s, many of us were afraid of flying. We were all afraid of a hijacking. That's why we let them x-ray us and pat us down and search our bags. But we should have been more afraid of the cigarette smoke. And that's because as human beings, we have a hard job calibrating our fears. We know alcohol kills way more people in Australia than snakes do, but snakes are unknown, whereas alcohol is known. We all know way more people die in a car accident than from a shark attack, but we can control cars, but we can't control sharks. We all know way more people die in a heart attack than in a terrorist attack, but there's something horrendous about a terrorist attack, whereas there's something mundane and boring about a heart attack. So as human beings, we have a hard job calibrating our fears. So how should we prioritise our fears? Here I like the work of Peter Sandman, who's an expert in risk communication. And he says as humans, we understand risk or danger as a relationship between what our heart tells us and what tells us. So with alcohol, our heads say, hey, this is something we should be worried about. But our hearts say, nah, it's all right, have another one. And so here we're too calm when we should be more alarmed. But then with sharks, our heads say, hey, it's all right. They're more afraid of you than you are of them. But our hearts say, no, this is a horrible way to die. So here we're alarmed when we should be calm. So Peter Sandman puts it this way: the risks that upset people are completely different than the risks that kill people. The things that kill us don't alarm us, but the things that alarm us won't kill us. We're very bad at calibrating our fears. But then we come to unique situations like the pandemic of the coronavirus, where our hearts tell us, I think there's something horrible going on here. And now our heads don't know what to do. Because on the one hand, our heads say, hey, let's be rational, let's be calm. We don't want to overreact. We don't want to become hysterical. We don't want to become chicken littles. But on the other hand, our heads are saying, no, I think we do need to react. Something needs to be done. More needs to be done, and it needs to be done sooner rather than later. So when it comes to pandemics, Peter Salmon just last week had this statement. We are torn between the intuition that we're not doing enough on the one hand and the embarrassed fear that we might be doing too much on the other hand. So how do we stay calm? How do we how do we know when to be calm? How do we know when to be alarmed? And how do we know when we're doing too much or we're not doing enough? Here I like what Jesus says. He says, do not worry about what you will eat or drink or what you will wear. Then he also says, look at the birds of the air. They don't store away in barns, yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you much more valuable than them? Can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? Jesus is saying, hey, think about what we can control. Control what we can control, but there's a God who controls everything, and we can leave what we can't control into God's control. Jesus is saying, he's not saying be apathetic. Don't do what we should be responsible for doing, but just realize how much we can control, and there's a God that controls everything else. And here I like what the Christian saying is, peace is not being in control. Peace is knowing someone else is in control. But then Jesus flips around and he says, you know what? If you want to worry about things, there's something we really should be worried about, and it's this. Don't be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Instead, fear the one who's able to destroy both soul and body in hell. In the same way we might say, hey, don't worry so much about the sharks. Worry about the heart attack. Jesus is saying, don't worry so much about your body by itself. Instead, worry about your soul and its destiny as much as you worry about your body. And this brings me to the third thing about fear. And the third thing about fear is this. What is of ultimate value in my life? Fear finally forces us to ask this question. When we travel to dangerous places, often we like to bring a fake wallet with us because we can let them steal the fake wallet. Because really, the wallet is not what is of value. They can have the wallet. We can lose the wallet. That's okay, because this is what has value. We don't want to lose that. So fear really is a fear of loss. What can we lose? What can't we lose? These are my three boys, and I like to tell them, boys, 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 you know, chances are when you grow up, you'll be just like me. So chances are when you grow up, you're going to be very short. You're not going to be very good looking. So your only chance in life is to study as much as you can and make as much money as you can. And of course, that's a joke. That's a joke. But it's funny, when I tell that in my Chinese church, no one laughs because I think, is he joking or is he serious? I think he's serious because that's what I tell my own kids. No, it's a joke. But fear exposes what is of ultimate value. What do I want for my children? Do I want them to be rich? Do I want them to be successful? Or do I want them to be loved? What is of ultimate value in this life? This is Robert Waldinger in the most watched TED Talk of all time. And here he asks this question, what makes a good life? And he quotes a Harvard study that he did where he traced the lives of over 70 men over a period of more than 70 years. And they asked the question, what makes a good life? And they found in the lives of these 70 men over a period of more than 7 years that what led to most happiness was not whether you had $1 million or not. It was not whether you were a CEO or not. It was not whether you had paid off your house or not. It came down to quality of relationships. So in the end, the most important thing in life isn't what we own. It isn't what we've done. It's who we have in our life. That is the ultimate value. And then Robert Waldinger quotes Mark Twain, there isn't time, so brief is life, for bickerings. Get over those little things. There's only time for loving, and even then, just for an instant. So we need to double down in these uncertain times on relationships. Then how much more than our relationship with our Heavenly Father, God, the God who loves us, who made us, who saves us. And if we can have a rich, flourishing relationship with this God, then we will enjoy shalom and peace in this life. Jesus says this, but seek God's kingdom. Be right with God. Don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will worry about itself. That's in God's hands. Each day has enough trouble of its own. So our question today was fear of the future. Should I be afraid? And I just want to give a nuanced answer. Yes, we should be afraid because that makes us take responsibility for what we should take responsibility for. But secondly, at the same time, we need to know how much we can control and really how much we can't control. And finally, it makes us ask the question, well, what am I afraid most of losing? What is of ultimate value in my life? I once sat next to a guy who I hadn't met before at a dinner, and he told me that he had just become a Christian this year. And I said, really? How did you become a Christian so late in life? And he said, well, it all came down to the GFC. His business partner lost everything in the GFC. He lost his house, he lost his car, he lost his job, but somehow he was still okay. So this guy was intrigued because he knows if he had lost his house, his car, his job, he would have been destroyed. But this guy was okay. And this guy said, well, those things weren't of ultimate value to me. In the end, I have a faith in a God who loves me, who made me, and who saves me. And this God is always there for me. So this made this guy who I was talking to take stock of his life. You know, I need that too, because things come and go. I too need a faith, a God who loves me, who saves me, and who made me. I need something of ultimate value in my life.
Well, thanks, Sam.
No, it's great.
Sam caught me off the guard there because I was about to give him the 2-minute signal, but he finished. Thanks. We're going to have the panel now. I'll just tell you what the number is that you need to phone if you didn't get it on the email to us. It's 0491 761 086. So that's 0491 761 086. If you want to have a look at that now, I can take your questions and then we'll ask the panel. We'll just take a minute to get the panel organised. Terrific. Well, tonight I want to welcome Dr. Andrew Giles from the Emergency Department at the RA. He's going to join us with Sam Chan down the end there and with Stephen Mulligan as well. I'll be taking questions from the audience, but I thought we might kick off with a few to start with. And look, here's a random question that came up this morning at the gym with one of the guys there. He was saying they're at an age where they could have kids, and he was saying he and his wife were wondering, you know, should they bring kids into the world in this current climate? I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
Well, go on.
You go, Sam.
Well, I was just saying, it is interesting times because up until the coronavirus, this would have been the best time to be born on this planet. You know, like we got rid of smallpox, we sort of got rid of polio, we haven't had a major war for a long, long time. We're living longer than ever before. So this is the best time ever to be on this planet. And yet at the same time, they're saying our levels of stress, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder are higher than ever before. So obviously there's something more than just health and material comforts that lead to well-being and health and happiness.
Yep, okay. Any other thoughts off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, the other argument people have is that it's irresponsible to have children these days, and that global warming, use of fossil fuels, consumption of resources. My own son thinks like that, although he's on his way to his second. But, you know, we have a responsibility to look after the earth as well, and more people is not the way to do that.
Yep, okay. Yes, Stephen.
I mean, my advice to anyone is absolutely. I mean, it's the greatest joy in life, I think. And you can be very pragmatic about it. And, there's always an article in the paper each year that it costs, $300,000 or $400,000 to raise a child, and, which is best flipped over quickly. But it's a really wonderful experience to go through. And I think it's terrific for the relationship that you're in with your partner or a spouse, and it's a wonderful thing personally to go through. So being entirely selfish, my advice would always be yes.
Yep. That's also, we're at a particular point in time, so we make a decision on whether we have a child based on what we're going through now, but we don't know what the world will be like in another 10 or 15 years. And that's something that is important to take into consideration when I think of people going through world wars and having kids in the middle of that sort of crisis that goes on. Stephen, when you were speaking, I was just wondering, are you saying that we're actually living on the edge financially anyway? And so, before this virus even came along, we were actually pushing the envelope before it even got here?
It's a good question. I think a lot of people feel like that's the case for themselves. They feel very heavily indebted, or generally a lot of people feel very heavily indebted, and they worry what would happen if I wasn't able to go to work anymore, if I got sick or lost my job, etc. But I took a lot of comfort from what Sam was saying. Is how rational are these fears? And if you lose a job, can you find another? Well, usually with some wherewithal and often assistance, yes. So that's a solvable problem. But in the end, I think ultimately, is that the most important or most valuable thing? It's easy to think yes, because that's what provides for your livelihood, your lifestyle, and your family's existence. But that's rationally, that's a solvable problem. And I think there's a lot of effort that's going into the community now, and by individuals themselves, into better financial management, financial understanding, and protecting themselves from those sorts of eventualities. So I don't think we're at the edge or beyond the edge. I mean, some people always are, but I think generally it's not quite so fraught as people might think. For many people, for some people it is, but generally speaking, it's the sensation of being at the edge. Are they really at the edge? Well, often, perhaps, but more often not, I think.
Okay. I was thinking about the fear thing when Sam was talking about sharks. It's ironic because that's my thing, the shark.
Yeah.
I was in an ocean swimming pool at dawn, and I was the only person on the beach. And I plunged into the water and it was just magical. And then all of a sudden I thought, what if a shark could have got washed over on the high tide and it was in the water with me? And it really spoiled the swim. I had to get out of the pool in the end. And that escalating fear that sometimes we have, which is irrational, I was just wondering, Andrew, do you come across that in emergency? What's it like there? And how do you deal with people in that situation?
Yeah, we come across it all the time. People are afraid of things that they needn't be afraid of. Oddly, they're, as Sam was saying, often not afraid of the things they should be afraid of.
Yes.
But I think how I deal with it is to encourage them. You can't say, don't be stupid. That's never going to worry you.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a problem. Just to reassure them. My personal nature is not to be afraid of things. I'm pretty laid back. And so if I don't see an issue, and I manage just by talking to them, hopefully get them to see that it's not really a thing to be worried about. I don't think there are any tricks or tips that you can give for that, but encourage them that things aren't as bad as they seem, that there's always hope. I think it's an important thing to leave people with.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Well, it's a big thing in the issue of we want to be rational, but it's so hard to be rational. And they say the big thing is this sense of loss of control. That's really what's causing the fear and anxiety. So Yes, I should be afraid of cars more than I am of sharks. I should be afraid of heart attacks more than I am of terrorists. But I can control how I drive. I can control how much I eat and exercise. But I can't control terrorists and I can't control sharks. So it's actually the loss of control that contributes fear.
Okay.
And that's why it's very interesting. Jesus says, I get that loss of control. But just understanding there's so much we can control. And that's okay. So I think part of the lie that's been told us is, you know, you can do whatever it takes to make you happy. That's every high school, university graduation speech. And so when we're not happy, you think it's our fault because I got told I can do whatever it takes to make me happy. I thought this was in my control.
Yeah.
But so much is not in my control. If we can just relax and say, you know what, that's okay. You know, life is a gift from God. Just enjoy it for what it is. And just realise there's so much that we're not meant to be able to control. Like we can't control who our parents were, where we were born, what schools they sent us to, and that's okay. It's okay realising there's so much I can't control. So that's what I was saying. Peace isn't being in control. Peace is knowing someone else is in control.
Yeah, okay. Connected with that, a question's just come in, which I think you talked about values before, Sam, and our values often are connected to our fears.
Sure.
This person has said, you know, what is it with the toilet paper? What is driving that fear behind wanting to get all the toilet paper?
Well, it's that mass hysteria that I don't want to panic. I don't want to be that guy. But, oh my gosh, if I don't become that guy, I'm going to miss out because the people in front of me have got all the toilet paper. There's only one roll left. So it's at this moment of, you know what, if I don't do this, I'm going to miss out. So again, it's a fear of loss and loss of control.
Yeah, okay.
There's something as basic as a roll of toilet paper I've got no control over anymore.
Yeah.
I think it's partly misinformation too.
Yeah.
That's why it's taken off in our society. I picked my son up from the airport this afternoon, and he was saying that he'd heard that coronavirus gave you terrible diarrhea. And his friends had told him that, and that's why everyone was buying toilet paper, which it doesn't.
Yes.
And so a bit of misinformation as well as fear of missing out.
Yep. Which is the whole thing of what social media feed I suppose you're listening to along the way and that sort of thing.
I don't.
Have you said you have people asking about this issue in your own...
Yeah, I think people are generally asking, you know, are we going to have supplies for our supermarkets in the coming weeks? Anyone who's got the answer to that question, I think, you know, please feel free to bring it forward. I think we all assume that there is, and we haven't heard anything to the contrary. But I think there's also been the questioning about why are we behaving like this? And are we really prepared to go through what's likely to be a socially dislocating experience like having to deal with a pandemic if we can't even agree on how much toilet paper we should be shopping for? Now, I'm not quite so pessimistic about whether we'll get through this or not. I absolutely think we will. But just that sort of early panic has really unsettled people, and particularly given how unnecessary it is.
Okay, can I just drill down on that with you? Some have suggested that the virus is really more of a test on our society, which is what you're suggesting, rather than constantly looking for somebody to blame, like the authorities, the health, department, the people in leadership, politicians, or whatever you'd like. But do you think we can pull together as a community rather than operate in an individualistic manner in this particular crisis we're in?
I think absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think we've shown time and time again through recent history that when the chips are really down, the community does pull together. We've been through 2 world wars, we've been through a Great Depression. All of them have been incredibly difficult and have led to enormous social, personal and political costs for our communities, but we've got through. And because we are very adaptable, we are able to deal with change and circumstances. And I don't think it'll be too long until the clutching for the last toilet roll turns into calling every elderly relative or neighbour or friend that you've got, checking if they're okay and, do you need any medicine picked up from the pharmacy, et cetera, et cetera. So, in fact, I think that shift's actually happening right now as we speak, that people are reaching out and becoming a lot more community-minded than we have been in aisle 4 of the supermarket and are looking after each other. So, yeah, I think we'll get through it.
Okay.
Because
so-
the fascinating thing is in the 20th century when they do happiness studies, they found the most happy generation was the generation that lived through the Depression and World War II. Yeah, they would have been the, in terms of health and material goods, they were the worst 2 decades to live through. And they say, well, what happened then was they had a shared common purpose. And that's what made it the happiest decades of their life. And I guess what this coronavirus would test us is, do we have a shared common purpose?
Yep.
Or is that every person for himself? Do we? And the interesting thing now in the 21st century, we're asking these questions, well, is there purpose? Like if I'm just atoms and molecules, just another species of life on the planet, just a blip in the timeline of the universe, is there a shared common purpose? Or is this some construct that we've been told to create social good? And have I been sold a lie? So it's forcing us to ask those higher meta questions. Like if we're, in the 20th century, we believed in, the archaic notions of God, king, country. But now in the 21st century, we're not sure we want to believe in God, king and country. Well, what is that shared common purpose we have?
What do we share in common in terms of our
Yeah,
purpose
that's
now?
right, yeah.
Okay. Sam, here's a tricky question
Sure.
that's come in for you. If God is in control, why is there a coronavirus in the first place?
I know, that's right. So we're left on the dilemma of two horns of an awful dilemma. You know what? You're right. There is no God. Everything's just random. We're just atoms and molecules, and this is just the ebb and flow of nature, where hurricanes happen, species become extinct, and this is one of many pandemics on planet Earth. And you're right, there is no rhyme, there is no reason, there is no purpose. Stuff happens, just get over it. Or there is a creator God who loves me, who made me, who saves me, and there is a purpose. So right now, in the white noise, I'm just seeing the trees, but one day if I zoom back, I'll see the forest and I'll see the picture. And if he's a loving, wise God, there must be a loving, wise plan for what's going on. I can't see it, but just somehow I'm part of a bigger story than just my own.
Okay. Well, let's move around back to Andrew here. As a doctor, you talked before about the importance of people knowing the truth, not getting false information. A big question here is, does telling people the truth lead to greater panic than holding back the truth? What are your thoughts on that?
Panic's a difficult word because very few people panic in the bad news in the hospital sort of situation. But definitely not telling people is worse than telling people the truth.
Because? Why?
They're totally wrongly set up psychologically for what's going to happen to them.
Yeah.
They handle things worse.
Yeah.
They don't prepare in the right way. They don't relate in the right way.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've met some families who will say, don't tell Grandpa he's got cancer.
Yes.
We don't want him to know.
Yeah.
And I find that very difficult.
Yes.
I usually do tell him.
Yeah. Yeah. Stephen, what about from your neck of the woods?
Oh, I was just thinking as you were speaking, Andrew, doctors are amazing at being honest with people, particularly pre-procedure, and these are the risks. And I've been in that situation before, having a minor heart issue more than 20 years ago. The very straight down the line advice that, this could go wrong, but, usually it's fine. And you do have a bit of a flutter and you think, oh, okay, well, they've done this many times before, it'll be fine. But then you move beyond people who, and I think doctors and health professionals are amongst the most trusted people, probably the most trusted people in our societies. Probably for the honesty. This is something perhaps my profession could learn a bit about. But if you look to other forms of community leadership, particularly like elected representatives, they don't have that. They don't have that inherent trust in them, and there's usually a questioning of everything they say, particularly now, more so than in years gone by. And that's difficult. It's a really difficult job that the current governments have got to get the information that they've got, because they still haven't got all the information. This thing seems to be changing on an hourly or daily basis. Get that information out and reassure the community that it's the best information, that it's available, and this is the best thing for the community. It's a really tough job. So you can only be honest.
Can I ask you a related question to that, which I'm sure you probably thought about a lot? But what does it mean to step up to leadership and take responsibility, particularly in this current crisis?
I mean, I think it's a willingness to demonstrate that you're willing to step into the fray, I think, and to try and assert. I always think leadership in politics is mostly about common sense, and so when a premier or a prime minister or even a chief medical officer is being briefed by people who are getting information to them, it's always so important to put that overlay of your own logic and rationale and what does that mean for the local footy club and the local supermarket and the local pub and the local nursing home and thinking about all those sorts of things. I think being able to coalesce all of that in your mind and be willing to make a decision and have confidence that you've made the best possible decision that you can based on the information that you've got at hand, stand by that decision and be willing to defend that decision, or perhaps a better way to say that is explain that decision. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure governments have got myriad options in front of them about what to do now. And usually I think a very good technique for convincing people that you are being honest with them is explaining your decision-making process. Yeah, we could have done this, but it would have meant that. And we could have done this, but it would have meant that. And so the reason why we're doing this instead is for these reasons. You walk people through that chain of logic, and it's, the vast majority of people go, oh, okay, well, that's fair enough. I feel a lot more confidence in what you've just told me and the decision that you've taken.
Okay.
So that's an important quality, I think, of leaders.
And if we take that down, like from people like in your position, but we move down not the food chain, but you know what I mean, we move down to smaller units, how do people further down who have responsibilities, say for teams in their company, or for people who've got a family unit or that, how do they take responsibility in this crisis, do you think?
Well, I'll jump in, is that right? So this is where I'm finding Peter Sandman, who I quoted, who's the expert in risk communication, who says our perception of danger and risk is really a product of what our heart tells us and what our head tells us. And, we can give them more information, more truth, more data, because that's what their heads want. But until we just what the heart says, that's how they're interpreting the truth. And several things are happening here. Either there's a breakdown in trust, so they don't trust the leader or the doctor. There's also, again, the sense of loss of control. So I'm not hearing anything you're saying because I feel out of control. And apparently what good leaders are meant to do, according to Peter Sandman, is good leaders meant to be able to empathise, speak their fears back to them. So they're not dismissing them or patronising them and saying you're being silly for panicking, but speak their fears back to them and get alongside, give them some agency, as much control as they can have, and just work their way through the problem. And historically, that's what good leaders have done. And if you allow me to put my theological hat on, essentially that's what the Bible says. Jesus became one of us. He knows every one of our fears and emotions. He knows exactly what we're going through. He can speak our fears back to us, and he works alongside us, gives us as much agency and control as we can have, and works with us.
Okay. Sam, what could you just list off what are some of those fears that you think Jesus speaks to?
Oh, well,
in human nature.
Yeah. So it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right down the bottom: survival, food, shelter, warmth. And he said, you know what? We all panic about food, shelter, and warmth, rightly so. But in the end, just have some perspective. If God can clothe the lilies, feed the birds, and you're way more important, just worry about. Again, we can't choose our parents, what country we were born in, what schools we went to. Somehow these things are beyond our control. And just trust somehow God has a wisdom in what he does, and life is just a gift from him to enjoy, a brief gift. And just so don't make more than what it is, don't make less of what it is. Then Maslow said the next thing we want is love and belonging. And that's what we can enjoy in Jesus and in the community. But the next one of Maslow's hierarchy needs is fulfillment, purpose, self-actualization. So again, we have to know why we're here. Where am I going? So bit by bit, I think Jesus helps us up those hierarchy of needs.
Okay. So we have a question related to that.
Sure.
Isn't trusting in God just a spiritual way to remedy your fears and has no real practical physical benefit?
Yeah. So what's fascinating, I've just read this book by Lee Sales, journalist, author. She just put out a book last year called Any Ordinary Day, and she's not a Christian.
Yeah.
But I'm just blown away because the front third of the book is just on people of a deep Christian faith and how they've managed to navigate incredible loss and trauma, and somehow, and even these people are nuanced enough to say, okay, it's not a magic crutch, but somehow I know when everything's stripped away from me, I know I can rest in knowing there's a God who loves me, who made me, who saves me. And we can say, oh, but it's a crutch. You're only just saying that. And you know what? You're right. It is just a crutch. It is just words, unless it really, really did happen. And I guess Easter's coming up in 1 or 2 weeks. And when I give talks to high schools on Easter, I say, you know what? You can tell yourself you're special. You can tell yourself you're loved. You can tell yourself important. You have value. You have purpose, meaning, and hope. But they're just words, unless historically, 2,000 years ago, there really is a Jesus who became one of us, died for you, and now lives for you. Because if that happened, that changes everything. It's not just a crutch. It's not just words. It's based on a real live event that really did happen.
Okay. Let's just keep you in the spotlight here, Sam. Some skeptics would say that Christianity is somewhat opportunistic in a crisis, that you might be actually quite opportunistic now, hoping that people will become Christians because of the crisis that's upon them. And they might even say, a skeptic might even say, look, that's a bit of scaremongering into belief, particularly if you start talking about an apocalypse. What would you say to a skeptic like that?
Yeah, so is it just scaremongering and, wow, here's a crisis? Well, I guess as Christians, we don't create the crisis. And, historically, that's what bad leaders do. They create crises because we gravitate towards bad leaders in times of crisis who give us black and white solutions. Come on this hill, follow me. More Christianity would say, you know what? This is a crisis. And again, matters of the heart. I'm going to speak your fears back with you, but I'm going to be with you. Put the money where. And so historically, in times of famines and epidemics and leper colonies, it's actually the people of faith. So it's not just Christians. People of faith are the ones in there feeding, clothing, being with the outcasts and marginalised. So somehow we don't welcome the crisis, but we will be there with you in the crisis.
Okay. Maybe Andrew, not to put you on the spot on this, but that book, yes, it is putting you on the spot. Lee Sales, in her book, Any Ordinary Day, she talks about these ordinary moments that seem insignificant decisions that you make that lead you to walk into the Lindt Cafe for a cup of coffee on the day when the terrorist is there and so on. And I think currently in this crisis, we don't know. We don't know what insignificant things we're doing, where we stick our hand on a doorknob or whatever. We don't know whether those things are going to turn our world upside down. How do you live with that? How do you live with those and manage those fears?
If I don't know and can't know, why should I worry about it?
Okay. So it's the whole thing of it's uncertain, I can't know the answer to that question.
And it's stuff that you can know, you should look for. Look for answers and stuff. But in these still very early days about the COVID-19 virus, we don't have a lot of answers. We're getting more and more every day, which is great. But there are a lot of answers we don't have.
Okay.
And we do what's thought to be sensible, but who knows whether that's going to be right or not. And some people, their personality doesn't allow them to think along those lines.
Yeah.
But I think the things that we can't influence, we should live as though they don't matter so much.
Okay. You look like you're about to say something.
No.
Go on, say it.
All right, okay. Let me just take a different question. We'll come back to finish with this about how we're going to manage our fears. But here's a question. There's a lot of media attention around the virus. Do you think the media created too much fear around the coronavirus initially, or is society too complacent? So this whole needle thing between acting, as you said, too quickly and too much, and then haven't we done enough and that sort of thing. So
it's a hard question to answer. I mean, the media is in the business these days of beating things up to gain attention, to get us to spend a few dollars on their newspaper or whatever the form of media is. With this, I think we now know that it was not them beating up the threat of the coronavirus. I think they were bringing our attention to something that is very, very serious. So I don't think the media was necessarily doing that. And I forgot the second part of your question.
I think basically what they're saying is the media. Do you think that the media created too much fear around the whole thing? And are we too complacent? Is it?
I think I'm not sure they created too much fear. I think we are struggling a lot of us are struggling to come to terms with the scale of the threat of this virus, because it's a different type of threat to what we usually confront. So I mentioned before, we've gone through 2 world wars and a Great Depression. Everyone can kind of see or get an understanding of that, and not something that you can't see unless you've got, an electron microscope and you're experienced in these things. And, if we are going about our business and we're, social distancing or even keeping ourselves in isolation, we don't actually know whether we are keeping ourselves sufficiently distant from it or not. Like, we don't quite know how to wrangle this. We can't see it. We can't experience it. And so I think there's a risk of complacency. I've been in contact with members of my electorate who are like, oh yeah, I haven't been to the shops for the last couple of weeks. I shop once. It'll be all right. It'll blow over. You remember SARS? That was all fine. We'll get through this. So some people are completely calm about it. I'm not saying everyone should be panicking or worried about it, but I think people do need an awareness of it. And I'm not quite sure we've got the right level of awareness throughout all of the community that needs to be concerned about it. And maybe we also need to pull back some people's a feeling of being petrified about it as well, to deal with that fear.
Fear freezes, doesn't it? I mean,
Oh,
when you're afraid, you
Mobilises.
can't do stuff. Despite your talk, Rich said that you can do really useful things, but it can stop you doing things.
Fight, fright, or flight. Yeah.
You could just
Freeze.
get frightened.
Yeah.
And I think my feeling is that the media were beating it up, but in retrospect, they got it right.
Yes, which is the whole thing of not being able to see something at the end.
Yeah.
And you're trying to look at it through the future, which is difficult.
Yeah, because it wasn't just the media. I work as a doctor still in the operating theatres, and for the last 2 months, we've all been saying the same thing. It'll be just like SARS.
Yeah.
The influenza's worse. It's just a variant of the common cold. Masks won't help. Just wash your hands. And now we realise, oh my gosh, we've been caught out. Which is the wake-up call for all of us. None of us are the experts we think we are. We don't know as much as we think we do. And we can't ever be in control, no matter how much we think we can be. So it's a bit of a wake-up call for us.
The control thing is very helpful to keep thinking
it
about.
really is. Can I live with uncertainty? And Jesus says, yes. And do I have to be in control? And Jesus says, no, you don't have to be in control.
Okay. The opposite of fear is courage. So could you tell us what you think is one tip from each of you on how you think people can be courageous over the coming months?
Start with someone else.
Well, okay. Now, I've thought about this question a bit, but really all I can think of as an answer, and you can't force people to be courageous, but I think showing a love and care for our society by doing the right thing, by washing your hands frequently, by not being in small groups so close to people, is a way we can demonstrate to people that we care for them. And I think, is that courage? I don't know, but I think it's the right way to go.
Okay. Sam?
Well, I think it forces us those 3 questions. So psychologists say when it comes to fear, anxiety, they're just 3 basic questions we've got to keep asking ourselves. I need to take responsibility for what I can, control what I can control, and take a restock of my life. What are the certainties I can hang on to? As I was saying, the certainties we can hang on to are that I'm loved and I can love. There's an old proverb, fear came knocking on the door, love answered, and no one was there. So the opposite of fear isn't so much courage, it's love, and it's love that makes us do those courageous things.
Okay.
I think unpacking it like that and being pragmatic about what we're actually confronting, what we can control, what we can't control, and thinking about what our role in this is as well, particularly at home, for example. I mean, the last thing young children want to see is a parent, running around going to water over this sort of situation. And, you know, sometimes it does take the courage to be calm. Also, when young children are repeatedly doing the wrong thing and ignoring you, ask them to stop. It takes a lot of resilience too, and courage to control yourself as well. So we should be practiced at these things.
Yeah.
But I think stepping through what we can control and then going out and doing it and limiting it ourselves to those things.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful because often when you're trying to be courageous or you're trying to actually help other people be calm, you yourself are trying to deal with your own tensions and anxieties within you. It's not like you can actually just walk out there and be, 100% certain of everything yourself. So that's really, really helpful. Thanks so much for this. I was thinking, over the coming weeks, months, it's really going to test us as a society in terms of our resilience as a community. How we manage these fears that are coming up and how we move into unknown terrain every day. We have to navigate a new scenario than the one the day before. People have, though, in other parts of the world, we've seen people demonstrate real creativity when it comes to overcoming their fears. If you think about the Italians in the lockdown, singing to one another across their balconies, very touching, very moving, very human, and a way to connect, I guess, when the virus is actually saying you've got to stay isolated and you can't be with each other. For those of you who had tickets tonight, you will find that in a few moments you'll get a feedback form. Please don't worry, it's very short. But this is the first time we tried to do something like this tonight. We want to improve on it and we'd love to get your feedback. A couple of quick questions. But also Sam mentioned Easter, and the Easter story is really a story that addresses our human mortality. It talks about Jesus as a person who gives us hope because he overcomes that great enemy, death itself. If you'd like to read about that story, and it is a page turner, let's face it, in the current climate that we're in. If you want to read that story, we put that particular part of the Bible story into a format that you can read called Fact or Fiction, the Resurrection. And you can download that when you submit your feedback form. You can get it that way. You may have friends who want to hear what we've talked about tonight but couldn't join us at this time on the live feed. This will be edited and put up on the citybibleforum.org website by the weekend. You'll be able to go and show friends where it is. They also will be able to download the Resurrection Fact or Fiction Guide there. So would you please thank the speakers tonight, Stephen Mulligan, Andrew Giles and Sam Chan for joining us. Thanks so much. And please keep connected to one another, keep looking after other people, and we'll see you in the future. Thanks.